Hi U12s, in this video we're going to look just at the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. So this comes from the key knowledge point that asks you to know the inputs and outputs and locations of both stages of photosynthesis in C3 plants and the general roles of enzymes and coenzymes in facilitating these steps. You'll be successful if you can list the stages involved in photosynthesis, identify the inputs and outputs of the light-dependent stage and the location, and if you can explain the role of enzymes and coenzymes in the light-dependent stage of photosynthesis. So just to define what we mean when we say C3 plants, we will unpack different types of plants later, but for now, C3, it refers to the way that these plants fix carbon, and the first molecule that's produced when it goes through the Kelvin cycle has 3 carbon atoms. It comprises of 85% of plants on the Earth, and that's why that's the main one that we look at. We'll look at some adaptations of other types of plants later in the study design. To give you an overview of photosynthesis, so this is the reaction here. You should have this committed to memory from last year. If not, get it in there now. You should understand the chemical formulas of each of the molecules that are involved in photosynthesis. So the inputs, carbon dioxide and water, and the outputs of glucose, oxygen, and water. You should know how to balance this equation. So 6 carbon dioxides, 12 waters, 1 glucose, 6 oxygens, and 6 waters, and you should know the chemical formula for each of those compounds. Light and chlorophyll always appear above or under the arrow between your reactants and products because they are not used up in that reaction. They are merely there to help facilitate that reaction occurring. We're going to look today in this video at the light reactions in photosynthesis. So the reactions that require light to happen, they are the first reactions to occur in the photosynthesis pathway. There are things that are made in the light reaction that feed into the light independent reactions in the next video, and then are cycled back through, and we'll talk about them as we go. So the 2 stages of photosynthesis both occur in different locations of the chloroplast. Hopefully this diagram is familiar to you from last year. You can see the chloroplast. It's got 2 membranes, the outer membrane and the inner membrane, and it's also got these stacks of membranes in the middle. So one of those is called a thylakoid or a thylakoid membrane. A group of them is a grainer. The space outside of those, that is the stroma. So today we're going to hone in on the thylakoid membranes and the reaction that occurs at them. And they are our light-dependent reactions. So they occur on the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast, and that's where the chlorophyll molecules are. So chlorophyll is used in the light-dependent reaction, and it's a very important enzyme in that reaction occurring. We'll look at the light independence reactions in the next video. So here is, I guess, my little representation of a thylakoid membrane stack or a grainer. Now remember that this reaction is occurring just on the membrane of each one of those. A major enzyme involved is chlorophyll. This reaction does not happen without chlorophyll, and it does not happen without light energy. It needs that energy input to give it that activation energy to break apart molecules so that new molecules can be created. Water is a major input of the light-dependent reactions. Basically, the way I remember it in my head is it takes lots of energy, which is why light and chlorophyll are involved, to split water molecules. They're really strong. And basically, we're trying to get split water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen atoms. That's the main goal of the light-dependent reactions. We know that hydrogen atoms don't just move themselves from one stage to the next, and they need some sort of carrier molecule, and it actually forms a coenzyme. So what actually goes in, and another input of this stage of photosynthesis, the light dependent stage, is NADP+, my apologies. And that is the molecule that carries the hydrogen atom. You can see this hydrogen atom here is now added to the NAD+, and that's taking hydrogen from the light-dependent reactions to the next stage, the light-independent reactions. So that's where the hydrogen goes, and the oxygen comes out as oxygen gas. Another product of this reaction is ATP. You imagine light energies come in, it's split water molecules, it's taken lots of energy to do that, but heaps more energy comes out. There's heaps of energy stored between the bonds of the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms. So if ATP is also a product of this reaction, then ADP, an inorganic phosphate, must be an input. So a recap from last year is ATP is the molecule that stores energy that the cell can use to do work. ADP is what's produced once that work has happened. It's got one less phosphate. The phosphate's not created or destroyed, it still exists, and it can be reattached by a process like this to create new ATP that the cell can use to do work. So in blue, they are our reactants of this stage. Ignore my handwriting, and our products are in red. This slide summarizes that as well with a few more words. I'm happy for you to pause the screen and have a look at that and have a read through that in your own time. It is also, the link to this PowerPoint is on Schoolbox, because I've just noticed that my head is in front of the little explanation about NAD+. But basically, that forms the coenzyme that is NADPH, that is essential for this reaction to occur because the hydrogen atoms need to be in the next stage. Let's have a go at some questions. So have a read through this and see if you can answer that. So the answer to that question is D. NAD+ carries additional energy when protons and electrons are added to it. So if you think about it, NAD+ is the loaded form of that coenzyme, which means that we need to put energy in for it to happen. Energy is stored between the bonds of any atom. If there's a bond, there is chemical energy stored in that. So if you've got two atoms joined together, regardless of what they are, that bond holds energy. So you can see that that was a pretty poorly answered question. If you got that wrong, it's absolutely understandable, but do keep in mind that the more bonds you have in a molecule, the more energy that's stored within it. Which is when you think about glucose, it's got lots of atoms, therefore lots of bonds, therefore lots of energy stored within them. Have a read through this one and have a go. So the answer to that question is B. So that the grainer, the splitting of water occurs in the grainer during the light-dependent reaction. So the grainer, remember, is that stack of thylakoid membranes. Last question. Fabulous. So 30% of students got this correct. When you think about, the students that answered this question had also learned about respiration. So you can see where that misconception that 51% of them thought that glucose was the original source of that ATP molecule, where it's not. It is sunlight. Sunlight is, if you think back to food chains, the original energy source for plants, for them to make ATP and therefore make glucose.